I never imagined that my life could take such an unexpected turn. When I married Mark, I thought it was the start of a new chapter filled with hope, love, and the blending of our families. Mark's son, Ethan, was quiet and reserved, but I attributed that to his adjustment to the new dynamics. After all, it must have been difficult for him to see his father move on with someone else. At first, everything seemed normal. Ethan was polite, albeit distant. He had just turned 20, and although we didn't talk much, I could tell he was deeply introspective. Occasionally, we would exchange pleasantries, but he mostly kept to himself in his room. I chalked it up to his age and the need for personal space, something I was happy to give him. But soon, I noticed small, subtle things that started making me uncomfortable. It began with the glances. I would catch Ethan watching me out of the corner of my eye, his gaze lingering longer than it should have. Initially, I dismissed it as nothing. Maybe he was still adjusting to me being around, learning the boundaries of our new relationship. But as time passed, his behavior grew more peculiar. He began sitting closer to me on the couch when Mark wasn't around, and his small talk often seemed to carry an undertone that I couldn't quite place. One night after a long day at work, I came home utterly exhausted. Mark was out of town for a business trip, and the house was unusually quiet. I made dinner for Ethan and me, and we shared a brief, somewhat awkward conversation about his plans for the weekend. He mentioned he had some late-night gaming sessions with his friends online, and then quickly retreated to his room after finishing his meal. I was tired and decided to cool it tonight. I had been feeling a bit under the weather lately, so I took a painkiller, climbed into bed, and drifted off into a deep sleep. However, my peaceful slumber didn't last long. At some point in the night, I felt something strange, a presence in the room. I stirred slightly, my mind hazy from sleep, and the medication I had taken earlier. My eyes fluttered open, but the room was dark, and everything was silent. Then I felt it, a soft touch on my arm. I tried to sit up, but I was still groggy, my mind not fully awake. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized someone was in the room. Panic surged through me as I tried to comprehend what was happening. I blinked rapidly, trying to shake off the sleep-induced fog in my head. My body felt heavy, almost as if I was still trapped in a dream. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to see who was in my room. Then, in the faint light creeping in through the window, I recognized Ethan's figure, standing at the foot of my bed. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice hoarse and groggy. What are you doing?" For a moment, he didn't respond. He just stood there, unmoving, as if he was trying to decide what to say. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The room felt thick with tension, and I struggled to piece together what was happening. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice quiet but strained. You looked uncomfortable. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." His words didn't quite match the situation. It felt wrong, him being here, standing over me in the middle of the night. I shifted in the bed, pulling the covers tighter around myself. My heart was racing, but I tried to stay calm, not wanting to jump to conclusions or overreact. "Ethan, it's late," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "You should go back to your room." "I'm fine, really. I must have just been dreaming." He hesitated for a moment longer before nodding slowly. Yeah, you're right. Sorry." He backed out of the room, closing the door quietly behind him. As soon as he was gone, I sat up and tried to shake off the lingering unease. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was he really just concerned about me, or was there something more going on? I wanted to believe it was an innocent mistake, that he had simply misread the situation, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. The following morning, I tried to put the incident out of my mind. When I saw Ethan in the kitchen, he acted as though nothing had happened. He greeted me with a casual, "Good morning," and carried on with his day, making me wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe I was too exhausted, then my brain had exaggerated the event. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the growing sense of discomfort. Ethan's behavior became more unpredictable. He started showing up in places he hadn't before, lingering in the kitchen when I was cooking, or hovering nearby when I was in the living room. And those looks, the lingering stares, became more frequent. There was something behind his eyes that unnerved me, a quiet intensity that left me feeling exposed. One evening, when Mark had returned from his business trip, I considered telling him about what had happened that night, but something held me back. I didn't want to cause any unnecessary tension between father and son, and I couldn't even be sure that what I felt was real. Maybe Ethan was just having trouble adjusting to our new family dynamic, and I was misreading things. Still, the sense of unease only deepened. I tried to avoid being alone with Ethan whenever possible, but that wasn't always easy. One particular evening, after Mark had gone to bed early with a headache, Ethan and I were left alone in the living room. I sat on the couch, trying to distract myself with a book, while Ethan played a video game on the other side of the room. After a while, he put down the controller, and without a word, moved closer to where I was sitting. My body tensed as he sat down next to me, his leg brushing against mine. I could feel his eyes on me, studying my every movement. "You're really beautiful, you know that," he said suddenly, his voice low and unfamiliar. I froze, unsure of how to respond. There was something unsettling about the way he said it, as though it carried a weight I wasn't ready to confront. My mind raced, searching for the right thing to say, the right way to diffuse the tension that was thickening between us. My heart fluttered in my chest as Ethan's words hung in the air between us. I forced a small, uncomfortable laugh, hoping to downplay the moment and steer the conversation in another direction. "Thank you, Ethan," I muttered, pretending to focus on the book in my lap, though the words on the page were now nothing more than a blur. "That's sweet, but it's late. We should probably get some rest." He didn't move. I could feel his gaze still fixed on me, intense and unwavering. There was a strange energy radiating off him, something almost magnetic that made the air feel thick. I shifted in my seat, inching away from him ever so slightly, but the weight of the tension refused to dissipate. "You're always so distant," he said, his tone soft, almost vulnerable. I don't know why. We could get along better if he didn't keep pushing me away. I was taken aback by his words. Ethan had always been the one to keep his distance, not me. This sudden shift in his demeanor caught me off guard, leaving me unsure of how to respond. He was speaking as though there was some deeper connection between us that I had failed to recognize, and it was unsettling. "Ethan, I'm not pushing you away," I said gently, trying to remain calm. "I care about you. We're still figuring out our relationship, It takes time to get used to new family dynamics." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It doesn't have to be complicated. I know you feel something too. I've seen the way you look at me." The breath caught in my throat. A wave of unease washed over me, and I suddenly felt like I had been pulled into a conversation I had no control over. His words were making me question every glance, every small interaction we had ever shared. Had I unintentionally given him the wrong impression? Or had he simply twisted our innocent moments into something more? "Ethan, I think you're misunderstanding," I said carefully, my voice firm. "Whatever you're thinking, it's not like that. You're my stepson, we're family." But Ethan wasn't listening. His eyes held a strange glint, a mix of desperation and determination, as though he was trying to will me into seeing things from his perspective. He reached out and placed his hand on my arm, his touch light but insistent. "Why can't we just be honest with each other?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know you felt it too, this connection between us." I pulled my arm away, my heart racing. The room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating even. I stood up, needing to put physical distance between us. This conversation had crossed a line, and I wasn't sure how to pull it back. "Ethan, stop," I said, my voice sharper now. You need to go to bed. This is inappropriate, and I don't know where this is coming from, but it's not okay." He stood up too, his face flushed with emotion. "Why are you acting like this? We're not doing anything wrong. Dad doesn't have to know anything. I can keep it between us." A cold shiver ran down my spine at his words. I had been hoping this was some sort of misunderstanding, that maybe he was confused or emotionally struggling with his father's remarriage. But now it was clear that Ethan had crossed an emotional boundary, and there was no way to deny the severity of the situation. I took a deep breath, trying to remain composed. "Ethan, I'm your father's wife. You need to respect that. Nothing like what you're suggesting can ever happen. I love Mark, and I care about you as part of our family. But this isn't right." For a moment, Ethan looked crushed, his face clouded with a mixture of disappointment and frustration. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out to the living room, leaving me standing there, trembling. I could still feel the intensity of the encounter lingering in the air, and I knew things had changed irrevocably. I sat back down on the couch, my mind spinning. I had no idea what to do. Telling Mark seemed like the obvious choice, but I feared what it might do to their relationship and ours. The last thing I wanted was to destroy the family dynamic we had all been trying so hard to build. But deep down, I knew this wasn't something I could ignore. The days that followed were filled with an unbearable tension. Ethan barely looked at me, and when he did, his eyes were filled with a mix of anger and something else, something I couldn't quite name. He was avoiding both me and Mark, spending most of his time locked in his room or out of the house entirely. Mark, oblivious to the tension, chopped it up to typical young adult behavior. But I knew better. The weight of the unspoken encounter between Ethan and me pressed heavily on my chest every time we were in the same room. I couldn't ignore what had happened, yet I was trapped in a dilemma. Telling Mark would shatter everything, but keeping quiet felt like I was complicit in something deeply wrong. One evening, a week after the confrontation, Mark suggested a family dinner. "We've barely spent any time together lately," he said with a smile, not realizing the irony of his words. "I think it's time for a little bonding, don't you?" I forced a smile, trying to hide the anxiety that had been gnawing at me for days. Ethan, seated across the table, barely acknowledged me, his face impassive as he poked at his food. The silence was deafening, and I could feel the unspoken tension between us crackling like electricity in the air. Halfway through dinner, Mark excused himself to take a phone call from work. The moment he left the room, the atmosphere shifted. I kept my eyes on my plate, praying for the dinner to end quickly, but Ethan had other plans. "You haven't told him, have you?" His voice was low, cold. I glanced up, startled by the sudden harshness in his tone. His face was hard, his eyes dark and unreadable. The boyish vulnerability I had once seen in him was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. "What you talking about?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my efforts to remain calm. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing through me. "You know what I'm talking about. What happened between us? You haven't told Dad. You're scared." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat making it difficult to speak. "Nothing happened between us, Ethan. You need to stop this. It was a misunderstanding, and you're taking it too far." His eyes narrowed. "A misunderstanding? Is that what you're going to call it? Because I know what I felt. I know you felt it too. You can lie to yourself all you want, but I won't forget." I stood up abruptly, my heart pounding in my chest. "This conversation is over, Ethan. You need to stop this now before you destroy everything." Ethan remained seated, but his gaze followed me as I walked toward the kitchen. Just as I reached the door, his voice stopped me in my tracks. "If you tell him, I'll tell him my version of the story. Who do you think he'll believe?" The threat in his words was undeniable. I froze, my mind reeling. Ethan was playing a dangerous game, and I could see now that he was willing to go much further than I had ever anticipated. I felt trapped, cornered by his manipulation, and my own fear of what this could do to my marriage. Mark returned a few minutes later, oblivious to the dark cloud hanging over the dinner table. I excused myself early, retreating to the bedroom where I could finally breathe. As I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Ethan's words haunted me. If I told Mark, it could unravel everything. But if I didn't, this could escalate even further. That night, as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. This couldn't go on. Whatever the consequences, I had to confront the situation before it spiraled out of control. The next morning, I waited for the right moment. Mark was getting ready to leave for a quick weekend trip to visit his mother, which meant I would be left alone with Ethan again. I couldn't let that happen without addressing the growing storm between us. As Mark prepared to walk out the door, I pulled him aside. My heart was racing, my palms sweaty, but I knew this was my only chance. "Mark, we need to talk," I began, my voice trembling. He looked concerned, his brow furrowing as he set down his bag. "What's going on?" I hesitated, the words heavy on my tongue. "It's about Ethan. Something happened while you were away on your last trip, and I need you to hear me out." Mark's face paled as I told him everything. About the night Ethan had come into my room. About the things he had said. About the uncomfortable moments that had followed. I was careful with my words, not wanting to accuse Ethan of more than he had done, but also not downplaying the emotional boundary he had crossed. When I finished, there was a long, suffocating silence. Mark sat down heavily on the couch, running a hand through his hair. His face was a mixture of disbelief, anger, and sadness. I don't know what to say," he finally muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't want to tell you," I admitted, tears welling in my eyes, "but I can't handle it anymore. He's not the same boy you think he is, Mark. He's pushing boundaries, and I don't know how to make him stop." Mark nodded slowly, still processing everything I had said. "I'll talk to him. This isn't something we can ignore." That evening, when Mark confronted Ethan, I stayed in the bedroom, not wanting to witness the fallout. I could hear their voices, Mark's stern and controlled, Ethan's defensive and angry, but I couldn't make out the words. After what felt like an eternity, the house fell silent again. When Mark came into the bedroom, he looked exhausted, emotionally drained. "He's going to stay with his mother for a while," he said quietly. "We need some space, and he needs help sorting through his feelings." I nodded, relieved, but still heartbroken. I knew things would never be the same between us, but at least the immediate danger had passed. The boundaries Ethan had blurred could finally begin to heal, though the scars would likely remain for a long time.